Welcome to Flexing Up by Oncore, the podcast for the contingent workforce. I'm Craig Watson, and today we're going to get right under the hood of what we've seen in 2024 and what lies ahead in 2025 for the contingent workforce. And I'm joined by two familiar faces, Damian Bridges, CEO, and Carl Oates, Head of Key Enterprise Accounts at Oncore. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thanks for having me.
Craig.
Thanks for having us back.
It's good to have you back.
I was going to get one back after the last podcast.
I know, mate. You were brilliant. And we're sort of like leaning into Christmas now, so it's a really good opportunity to probably reflect on what the year it's been and probably say, well, what can we look forward to, especially in these unstable and unsteady times. But all the talk this year, and it's been hot talk, has been around, in talent management, has been around AI or the contingent workforce. They're the two hot topics. And today we're really going to focus on contingent workforce. So we'll start with you, Carl. We spoke a few months ago and you talked about the data from the survey and some other things. What in your mind since then has changed in the contingent workforce space?
Yeah, so last we spoke, Emily and I focused heavily on sort of the shifting contractor priorities, where a lot of what was particularly around finding roles that sat outside of their comfort zone, new challenges, and that was probably right after end of financial year, where people were looking for, not obviously chasing dollars, but also looking for something new. But then we have noticed in the last, in particular, like I'm on the phone with contractors myself and my team daily, and there were a few that sort of sprung to mind through these conversations where it was actually growing a focus on stability and longer term contracts, taking something that may be in a different field now, but actually longer term, at least 6 to 12 months rather than just your 3-monther. And look, it could be around the growing concerns of obviously cost of living and obviously that job security, but they are looking for that stability heading into early 2025, not looking to chase a job sort of like early in the new year, but actually coming back to work after whatever holiday or forced shutdown period. So that's what we've noticed a lot in the contractor space. Probably over the last few months, more so from the client perspective, is that there's been quite a few like tender opportunities that we've sort of been put forward for, and a lot of that has always been focused on price and technology and operational details and processes across all the different account management models. However, there has been a real shift, a noticeable shift in the 4 tenders that we have sort of gone forward through, an emphasis on customer and contractor satisfaction. And It kind of aligns to a lot of the things that Emily and I were talking about in the previous podcast around our current clients really focusing on that contractor journey, what that looks like. But now we're even getting questions asked on what does your contractor journey look like? What's the focus on your culture? What's your CSAT, your NPS scores? What does that look like? And it has been an emphasis for them. And I think it's kind of what's setting different workplaces apart, really. So what makes me go and choose this job if I've got the same price, the same tenure, the same contractor rate and location, but that real culture fit is something that the contractors are focusing on, and therefore I think to retain that talent, clients are also focusing heavily on that as well. So they've been the two things that I've taken away mostly since our last podcast, but I'm not sure if, Damian, have you got anything that you'd like to add there?
I think one of the things that came out in our contractor survey was around meaningful work, and that's what you're saying, Carl, isn't it, really? I want to work for an organisation where the values are right, the behaviours are right, but it's meaningful for me to advance my career. I think the other thing, Craig, I may have mentioned that things were going to get worse before they got better, and I think they have, but I was wrong in the sense of some of the contractor day rates have actually, I've seen a 4% increase in those in those highly specialised roles, cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, some high-end full-stack software engineers. So that's been a bit of a surprise, which says that if you've got great skills, there is still demand out there for that talent.
Yeah. Well, we know in labour markets and recruitment cycles, throughout history, that when there's a bounce back, doesn't matter whether it's a quick one or a slow one, that the contingent space is the first area to pick up because companies who are looking to hire, they still got a little bit of, fear, a little bit of sort of let's hold back, and we don't want to add full-time permanent headcount because they're not sure what's happening. So we lean into that contingent space, and some of this stuff you're talking about probably reflects that. But from both sides, firstly, candidates are more looking for stability, but also looking for alignment with values with companies, as opposed to that primary need of my next contract, I need to be paid more, or I'll follow the money. That seems to be just on the back burner for the moment. And then with clients, hopefully some of them are recognising that the war for talent leading into 2025 is going to be huge, because there will be some sort of bounce back, and it will start in the contingent space. So maybe when you're talking about some of the tenders you've been through, and they're looking for more values aligned, and they're really trying to, and I guess it's about engagement and retention of contractors. Would that be fair to say?
Yeah, definitely. I think if it resonates with the contractor and they're gonna pick that role over another role, maybe a lesser tenure, might be more money, but I think the values tend to be a big thing, especially when I'm on the phone to some of the contractors and they're talking to me about, the hiring manager that they spoke to, really excited about starting this role. A lot of that does speak to, those values really aligning.
Well, it's not like the old days, right, where contractors, and this has changed over time, but contractors, in most people's minds still, if you're not in the space, are more people that are short-term, not career-orientated, maybe, I'm not going to say dossing on someone's couch, but maybe renting and maybe not having a family. But that dynamic or that demographic's really changed over the last couple of years. They're family people with mortgages, and those hip pocket expenses and challenges are just as real for people in the contingent workforce as for permanent.
Exactly. The amount of documentation that my team's been doing for, getting like things for rental properties or loans and a car loan documentation. Yeah, heaps of that's come through probably since end of financial year. So I think it doesn't matter what gig you're going into. These contractors, they've got their mortgages, they've got their expenses and their overheads, which is speaking to a lot of that cost of living crisis that, they're wanting to have that security and, continue those loans long term. And
Damian, do you think that clients or enterprises that engage contingent workforce are beginning to understand that workforce a little bit better and not just, treat them as that invisible hidden workforce that is come in, come out? It's more, they are career aligned. They do have stress, financial stress, so we can embrace them a little bit better?
Yeah, I think so. Look, I was on a call last week with somebody who's I would call him a bit of an industry heavyweight in the US. Maybe you and I are the industry heavyweights here, Carl. And
so you're talking about knowledge or size?
Yeah. He was saying that contingent over there now is at 43%, is still growing. Wow. And his comment was that EOR and AOR, employer of record and AOR, organisations looking to engage talent but have them cared for by somebody else, is hot. That was his comment, is hot. So, 43%, 50%, you can't ignore that.
No.
And if it's happening in the US and it's happening in Europe, it's bound to happen here.
Yeah. Well, maybe that's a good sort of segue into 2025 and even the back end of 2024, and maybe even contingent workforce models. Like, it's been a legacy industry. Like, you had your MSPs and those sort of areas that really dominated, and the VMS and there's other opportunities in the market now that can be a little bit more agile and a little bit better for both candidate and enterprise in terms of how you engage with them. So, have you got any thoughts on that, Damian?
Yeah, I think I said when we caught up last time that, have a look around at what is out there. I think those traditional models are now being tested. Certainly, one of the comments I heard in Sydney last week, the talent teams are getting bigger, they're getting better, they're getting smarter, they've got access to tools. And we're seeing an array of different models being proposed in the market. Carl mentioned some tenders that we'd been involved in. And I think we're seeing that enterprises are now starting to challenge the status quo. So, things have to change. We're removing layers and solutions out there that are quite innovative, where they're focusing on cost, risk, quality of talent. They'll be the ones that I think will will be prominent over the next 12 to 18 months, because earnings and value are so important to organisations now. So, that cost risk, outsource your risk, and if you can help on the quality side as well, they'll be well viewed.
Yeah.
Technology-driven processes as well, rather than focusing on, so much of what exists out there is driven by spreadsheets and constant Google Drive, and it becomes quite cumbersome. So a process that's streamlined for not only the end user, being the contractor, but also for the users within an enterprise, like a talent team or a procurement team, logging into the one place, all having the same sort of experience and ecosystem. I think that's something, rather than going into 5 different websites or like a Fieldglass or another VMS, or jumping through lots of different programs, the focus in being in one platform, which is the shift that we've really tried to focus on in our space with our technology. That's where I think the future of that sort of like MSP model, or the VMS Lite, as we like to call it, lives.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because, and I've heard this a couple of times with people that I've spoken to on your podcast this year, that if you can't see it, you can't manage it. And the contingent workforce has been invisible, for a lot of enterprises. You talk to, I've had discussions with you, Damian, and other people that we've been in meetings with have spoken about enterprises that have no real idea of the size of their contingent workforce. They put a guess out and say we've got X number, and it could be 3 times that amount, because they don't know where they are. They're in different buckets of revenue or profit centres, and it's just and if you haven't got that, like you're saying, Carl, tech-driven solutions, the tech is probably going to be where you can see these people, and where the reporting that sits behind it will make it so easy for companies using it in the right way to say, oh, okay, we've got 10, data analysts over here. We've got a project coming up in another department, maybe even in another state. If these people are working remotely, in 6 months' time, we know these contracts are winding down. We'll keep them in the business, where there's been too much leakage out of businesses, because contractors, by definition, they're working from contracts. So it means when they're near the end of a contract, they will be looking for their next opportunity. They have to.
Absolutely. Yeah. 6 weeks out, 6 to 8 weeks out, typically.
And if you haven't got that visibility internally, you must lose a lot of those people. There must be a lot of leakage just from that.
Yeah, well, I even notice from our perspective, when contracts roll off with some of our clients, I'll end up calling somebody that we've just onboarded with a previous client that was on a 3-monther, going to another one of our clients saying, "Oh, g'day, Carl, good to talk to you again. Starting a new gig with so and so." So yeah, as Damian said, if you're not looking to extend, or you're not retaining that within that 6 to sort of 8 weeks towards the end, they're already jumping. They're already looking at the next opportunity. They've got their sights on something else. So yeah, I think it's really important. If that talent is good and you want to mobilize them on other projects, or if you're not doing it 6 to 8 weeks out from their end date, they're gone.
Yeah. And from client side, it must be difficult too, or enterprise side, because quite often they're dealing with a number of third-party recruitment firms.
Yeah, they are. And I know, speaking to a lot of the recruiters that we service, and they're all, as I said before, hyper-specialised professional outfits, very, niche players that can find you those unicorns from time to time, and quite regularly they do. They get frustrated with end clients on the extensions as well, and then they lose the talent. So I think it's up to everybody in that supply chain or ecosystem, whatever you want to call it, to make sure that that talent is retained. 6 to 8 weeks out, as you said, Craig. People are looking before Christmas, probably even earlier, for their next gig.
I've heard a lot of talk this year, again within the area of Oncore, about vendor neutrality and how important that will be with clients moving forward. So in the tender processes, are you seeing that clients are more interested in understanding solutions that will provide vendor neutrality? And before we even go to that, maybe one of you can give us sort of a definition or a meaning behind what it would mean to be vendor neutral in a space like this.
Oh, well, in terms of true vendor neutrality, for Oncore is that, and how we maintain that is, we're able to trade with hundreds of recruiters across Australia, but we also don't do any recruitment ourselves.
Yeah,
and that is true vendor neutrality, where we're not stepping on toes. We're able to trade. We're able to manage the books of these recruiters so that they can do what they do best, and that's recruit. and we sit in as an enterprise solution as a payroll provider for the directly sourced contractors. So being able to support the recruitment panel of those suppliers, but on top of that, also pay the internally sourced contractors at obviously a very reduced rate to what I guess a lot of recruiters are charging. It does assist drive down the costs, and being truly vendor neutral, I think, is what positions ourselves quite well in the market.
It takes the bias out.
Yep. Yeah,
I think that's the key thing.
And you're seeing that enterprise businesses don't want to manage that process internally, right? And they want to see a solution that can come in and look after it for them and have the reporting behind it and have the understanding, the visibility, and be cost effective.
Yeah, paying the panel that they have, managing the vendors, making sure that that they're doing their job. They don't want to be worrying about paperwork as well, which is everyone's I think bane in this space. And they can do what they do best, and that's going out and that's recruiting. And the focus then sits on putting the best candidates forward, and all of the paperwork is handled by us in that space. So
you make a good point there, because a lot of companies would have the capacity and the resource to do the recruiting, and also maybe even do the workforce planning properly. Maybe they've got that right where they know where people are, but that compliance piece that sits behind it, that goes with independent contractors, is something that most companies don't have the ability to look after themselves.
Well, our big focus is obviously making sure that anybody that we do on board does go through, the required compliance checks, not only by our end client, but then on top of that, what we would consider the bare minimum for our compliance and risk analysis. So we make sure that, whatever contractor comes on board, whether they're coming through an agency or coming, directly through us, goes through, workplace health and safety training via one of our partners, WorkPro. We have the ability to, do a whole host of checks through there, but then also, making sure that contractors are aware of their obligations for safe work in the workplace. And we do rigorous follow-ups with our vendors and recruitment panel that we work with on some of our enterprise clients to make sure. It's a long process and it can take some time, but it is very important. We are risk averse, and so are our clients. We need to protect them.
Yeah. So we talked about what's changed since the last time we spoke to both of you, from there until probably the end of 2024. And some of this might be similar, but crystal balling into 2025, is there anything within the contingent workforce space that you see that it might already be there but evolve even further?
I think we've seen a little shift towards SOW work.
Yep.
And that, when I talked about risk before, that may be on the back of some of the legislation that was introduced earlier this year. That's probably the key thing that I see continuing for a little while. And I think, as you said before, Craig, it was the old contingent workforce is first to go and first to come back. Right? So when that comeback is, we kind of think it was going to be August next year. I think we'll start to see some increase in demand probably earlier than that.
Yeah.
And I think there's some investment coming back into the markets.
Agreed.
In certain areas. I mean, the Reserve Bank's, one day they're on, the next day they're off, and I think that once there's some sort of cash rate change, and a lot of companies are focused on earnings at the moment, and value as opposed to huge growth. So just a little bit of confidence back in the market helps, and of course contractors are first to come back in. So we're hoping that that's earlier than August.
Yeah, and I think you're right. There are a lot of businesses out there that want to grow and want to start investing back in their own businesses, but the cost of money for them at the moment is just a little bit too high. So when that comes down a bit, that'll be great. Hey, Carlo, when I was speaking with you yesterday, you said that you're noticing that some clients are extending contracts, that you haven't seen that this time of year for a little while.
Yeah. I did do some prep, Craig, before the podcast, so made sure I ran some stats for you. When I was actually looking at last year's data and even the year before, in terms of the contract extensions that we sort of really push around the 30th of September.
Yep.
We notice they're usually only like a 3-month extension. So going to the end of the year, and then, when there's shutdown period, contracts roll off, we start again in the new year, whether they're bringing the same people back on or they're going to go look for new talent around that sort of January, February when things start to pick back up again. That's been the case for probably the last 2 or 3 years, or at least since I've been at Oncore. What I've noticed this year is those extensions actually going to the end of March next year. So those ones from September have been pushed out into early 2025. Doesn't necessarily mean those contracts are going to last until then, but because there's been I think more of a focus on sort of like change management early 2025, making sure that, there's talent there to go at the start of January when people are coming back. We've seen those contracts actually extend out to there. So there's a clear focus in that technology and transformation space. Probably more so than other years. I've also noticed there's been an uptick, especially in our sort of like our white collar construction roles that we do work for and work with clients. They go through tender phases and staged works. So bid riders in particular have been extended to the end of 2025 with a lot of major works, predominantly in Queensland. And I think that's really been a focus on the Olympics in 2032. Sure. So those clients that are, working around, Brisbane Airport and fixing everything up for, the upcoming games, those tender phases are now in early stages or moving into stage 2 next year. And there's been obviously a focus from that 30th of September, actually pushing these out into, not worrying about it in January, we're going to do it now and push it out to the end of the year. And so they're definitely focusing on cost and spend, but we've noticed it's sort of been flat with new starters, but we've seen an increase in contract extensions, which probably, mobilising existing workers into other projects, keeping them on so that they're ready to go rather than, later and worrying about it next year. I think there has been a little bit more planning, and that could just be a sign of the market that it is right now, keeping that talent, not wanting to lose it, not wanting to scramble in 2025.
Well, that's really interesting, isn't it?
I think the other thing, I caught up with somebody in Sydney a few weeks ago who is a consultant, more in the finance, procurement, cost out. And one of his comments was that many organisations, particularly the larger ones, had cut capability too deep.
Right.
So a lot of jobs were kept out of the press that were made redundant. And now a lot of organisations are struggling with that ability to deliver because they cut too deep and let too many good people go. So what's happening is contractors and consulting are coming back in.
It's interesting, isn't it? And if you're saying that, historically we know, again, with enterprise, they tend to let contracts around this time of the year, a lot of them run down with the knowledge that they'll probably re-engage late January because they, that period where there's not much going on in the business, they don't want to pay contractors, right? So if that's changing in construction and some other areas within tech, that's good for the people involved, but it will cause a war for talent in that late Jan, early Feb, because there's not going to be as many people there as in the past. So that, again, could drive another wave.
Yeah, I think the other thing too is a lot of these people have great skills that are needed worldwide. Yeah. So not just Australian companies, they can go and work for others now across the globe.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's exciting times, isn't it? I guess before we finish off today, and I'll talk about this to both of you, is, Oncore's positioning as a business, how can you support both contractors and clients, either existing or potential, into 2025?
Yeah, so I think I guess where we help the most for our clients is being able to cast that net over the contingent workforce, putting a blanket over, where they are, how much they're getting paid, what their roles are, whether they're fully compliant or not, because, we've gone through the checks, everyone that comes up on the system, is fully compliant. And on top of that, anything that has to do with like right to work, all that kind of stuff is completed by us. So, that's been one of the key areas we've really helped our clients probably with our Oncore Flex and Simplexity model over the last sort of 12 to 18 months. The other thing where we can help too is, paying your recruitment panel, managing invoices, centralizing all that, consolidating it into one source of truth. Yep. There are so many invoicing errors that can happen because there's so many different business units, and putting them all under one consolidated invoice can be difficult. Integrating with so many different portals to upload invoices like your Coopers and your Arebas and all that kind of stuff. There's so many touch points, and therefore more touch points, more errors. Having that one centralized sort of company managing it, we have been able to help. Also, and that can come down to a centralized timesheeting and reporting process. Reporting is big for clients, wanting to make sure that, as I said, when you cast that blanket, you give them a full view over the workforce. And then on top of that, we've run a few implementations over the last say 6 months with new clients, and I think the biggest takeaway from those implementations have been no data you're going to get is perfect. There are so many different business units and conflicting processes, and with those processes, it's really important to centralize it as much as possible, having that ability to say, okay, we need to bring on talent. What's the quickest and most cost-effective way to do it? And we work with because we've implemented with so many different systems in the past. We work with the clients to say, okay, this would be a model that we would recommend, but on top of that, we don't want to take away too much from the familiarity, because you change one thing for a hiring manager, it creates a downstream effect, and everyone starts freaking out. So yeah, communication's key in those in that area.
I think the final thing too is that we have the ability to introduce the enterprise clients to, as I said before, 200 to 250 hyper specialised boutique great recruiters.
Yeah.
Who we've worked with for many, many years. Lauren Sharp's a great example. The ability for us to do that and make those quick introductions to expedite a search process for contractors, should be highly valued.
Yeah. I think one of the key things there too that I took from what you said, Carl, is data and reporting is king, and every C-suite within every enterprise and organisation demands reporting and demands visibility over data. And if you can get that, that'll make whoever is responsible for the contingent workforce set up in their business, it'll make their life so much easier if they have access to the data and the reporting.
Yeah.
Hey, before we go, if someone wanted to contact Oncore to have a discussion about their contingent workforce, what's the best way of doing it?
Best way to reach out to us is through our website. We have a query bot on there, as well as links that come through to the relevant area. So it's all powered by HubSpot. You can reach out via there, or on LinkedIn. You can either reach out directly to me or myself or Damian. I'm more than happy to field any questions through those channels. Perfect.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today, both Damian and Carl. It's been fascinating. I hope you guys get to enjoy the holiday season a little bit, and we all look forward to a very, very busy and productive 2025. So from Flexing Up by Oncore, that's it for this year, and we'll look forward to catching up again early in 2025.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for listening to this episode. Make sure to subscribe via your preferred podcast platform, and for more information on Oncore, visit encoreservices.com.